It all started as a joke. At this pre-party, I kissed Ron in front of my boyfriend, thinking it would get a reaction out of him. But instead of the playful response I expected, he took it seriously, and everything changed after that. I know how it sounds. It sounds stupid. I kissed my boyfriend's best friend just to make him jealous. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, I swear. Things just spiraled. 1 minute, it was a joke, a spur-of-the-moment decision that I didn't think twice about, and the next, I found myself sitting here trying to figure out where it all went wrong. I realize that saying I didn't plan it sounds like an excuse, but honestly, that's how it happened. It wasn't some calculated move or anything. It just snowballed. So, I guess I should start from the beginning, before it all went downhill. My life wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. I had a decent job, and I was with a guy who, though not exactly my type, treated me better than anyone else ever had. We weren't married, but we were serious. I'd been through a lot in past relationships, the kind with extreme highs and crushing lows. And this was the first time I was with someone who didn't come with all that drama. I met my husband in my early 20s. At the time, I had just gotten out of a reckless relationship with someone I thought I was in love with. But in reality, we were too young and too wild for it to last. When that relationship ended, it was brutal, but it was for the best. I wasn't looking for anyone new. I was still dealing with the fallout. But my friends dragged me out to an event, and that's where I met him, my husband. At first, I didn't think much of him. Sure, he was cute, but I wasn't ready for another relationship. I was still too caught up in the mess of my last one, but he was persistent. He kept showing up, asking me out, and eventually I gave in. I didn't expect much. I thought maybe we'd hang out for a while, have some fun, and that'd be the end of it. But before I knew it, we were spending more and more time together. He was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was stable, reliable. He actually followed through on his promises, and that was something I hadn't experienced before. After the chaos of my previous relationship, that stability felt like a breath of fresh air. We moved in together a few years later, and for a while, things were really good. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but I thought his flaws were manageable. I didn't think they would ever become a problem. Which brings us to the night of the pre-party, where everything changed. It was supposed to be a fun, casual hangout before we all went to a concert. It was just a bunch of friends drinking and chatting, with music blasting in the background. I wasn't even planning to go at first, but my friends convinced me that I needed a break. They were probably right. My husband was there too, of course. We didn't do everything together as a couple, but we had a shared group of friends, and hanging out together was usually fun. Ron, my husband's best friend, was part of that group. We'd known each other for years, but there had never been anything between us. He was just Ron, nothing more, nothing less. I'd never even considered the possibility of anything happening between us. He was like a brother to me. One of the girls at the party brought a drinking game, a card game with dares. It wasn't something you sat down to play. Instead, she would walk up to different groups, ask a question, or throw out a challenge from the card she was holding. There wasn't really an option to refuse. So, when she came over to the group I was talking with, Ron and a couple of other friends, she pulled out a card and said, "Kiss the person to your right or jump in the pool. Choose fast." I looked around, and the person to my right was Ron. Now, I definitely wasn't about to jump in the pool fully clothed, so I just kissed Ron. It was supposed to be funny, something lighthearted to keep the game going. In that moment, I didn't even think twice about it. People were watching, laughing, cheering us on. It was just one of those silly party moments that you assume won't matter in the long run. I wasn't thinking about the consequences, about how my husband would feel or how it might look. I just wanted to keep the mood going and, honestly, get a reaction from my husband. A playful one, like he might roll his eyes or tease me about it later. But that's not what happened. Instead of brushing it off, he took it seriously. And from there, everything started to unravel. It started out lighthearted, just a joke, but the moment it happened, I realized I had miscalculated. My husband didn't laugh, like I thought he might. He didn't get angry either. He just stood there, frozen, staring at me with a look of hurt and confusion. It was as if his mind couldn't grasp what had just happened, like he was struggling to process it. And before I could explain, before I could even begin to reassure him, he walked out, left the party, left me standing there completely dumbfounded. It hit me then. Maybe I had crossed a line. It wasn't meant to be a big deal. Just a playful kiss with Ron, a harmless gesture among friends. At least, that's what I told myself. But seeing my husband's face, the way his expression changed, made it all feel real. Far more real than I had anticipated. What was meant to be a silly moment suddenly didn't seem funny at all. It felt heavy, and the weight of it started to settle on me as I stood there, surrounded by people, yet feeling completely alone. I stayed at the party, telling myself everything would blow over. I didn't run after him because I didn't believe it was serious. Not at first. He just needed a minute, I thought. Maybe he'd come back inside, cool-headed, and we'd laugh about it later. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in my stomach. I checked my phone over and over, waiting for a message, a call, anything from him. There was nothing. By the time I finally left the party, I was torn between guilt and confusion. When I got home, the house was pitch dark. He wasn't there. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent him a simple text, "Where are you?" and waited for a response that never came. I convinced myself he just needed some space, that by morning things would go back to normal. But morning came, and he was still gone. That's when the guilt really began to settle in. The kiss with Ron, it hadn't meant anything, but I hadn't thought about what it would look like to him. I hadn't considered how he would feel watching me kiss another man in front of him. What if it were the other way around? What if I had seen him kiss someone else? Yeah, I'd be furious. But even then, I couldn't believe it was bad enough to tear us apart. The entire day I was a mess, trapped in my own thoughts. Should I call him again? Should I give him more time? The fact that he hadn't blocked me felt like a good sign, so I convinced myself he'd reach out when he was ready. But he didn't. Days passed and still nothing. Every buzz of my phone brought a flicker of hope, but it was never him. By the end of the week, the worry had turned into full-blown panic. I tried to keep calm, but a part of me feared the worst. Had that stupid kiss really ruined everything? Desperate, I finally reached out to his best friend, Steve, hoping for some insight. Steve's response was brief, just a "he's okay, he needs space." No details, no comfort, just the facts. If Steve was involved, that meant my husband was serious. This wasn't just a cooling off period. This was something bigger. A few more days of silence passed before I couldn't take it anymore. I called Steve again, practically begging him to convince my husband to talk to me. I just wanted to know where we stood. Did he want to work through this? Or was this it? I couldn't handle being in limbo any longer. Finally, Steve agreed, and after what felt like an eternity, I got a message from my husband. "We need to talk," it said. My heart sank as I read it, knowing that whatever was coming wasn't going to be easy. We met at a cafe, and as soon as I saw him, I knew things had changed. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, but it wasn't just that. There was something else, something colder about him. This wasn't the man I knew. The man who could always find a way to break the tension with a joke. We sat down and I didn't know where to start. I wanted to apologize, to explain that the kiss had meant nothing, but before I could even open my mouth, he spoke. "I don't get it," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "Why would you do that? Right in front of me." I felt my stomach twist into knots. The explanation I had rehearsed 100 times in my head fell apart in that moment. The words felt weak as they came out. I told him it was just a joke, that it wasn't serious, that I hadn't meant to hurt him. But he didn't buy it. His eyes stayed fixed on me, his voice steady but colder than I'd ever heard it. "I know you say it was a joke," he said, "but it didn't feel like one. You kissed him like I wasn't even there. Do you know how that made me feel?" I couldn't even meet his eyes. I felt small, ashamed, like a child caught doing something wrong. I wanted to make it better, to say something that would fix this, but deep down I knew there was nothing I could say to undo the damage I had caused. After what felt like an eternity of silence, he finally spoke. "I just need to know," he said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of the moment. He paused, his eyes searching mine. "Is there something going on with Ron? Has there ever been?" The question hit me like a punch, but I quickly shook my head, trying to hold back the panic bubbling inside. "No, of course not. It was just a stupid joke," I stammered, my voice barely steady. "I wasn't thinking. I would never cheat on you." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stared down into his coffee cup, as though the swirling liquid might hold the answers he was searching for. The silence between us stretched out, thick and suffocating. I could see the doubt etched on his face, and it killed me. The trust we had built over years was slipping away, crumbling because of one careless mistake. "I don't know if I can get past this," he said at last, his voice low, almost broken. "It's not just a kiss. It's the fact that you didn't even think about how I'd feel. It's like I don't matter to you." His words cut deeper than anything else could have. He mattered. He mattered more than anything. But in that moment, I had hurt him in a way that made him doubt that truth. And now, I wasn't sure how to make him see how much he meant to me. We talked for a little while longer, our conversation circling the same painful territory, but by the end, it was clear that things weren't going to return to normal anytime soon. He said he needed more time, more space to figure out what he wanted. I didn't know if that meant he was planning to come back, or if this was the beginning of the end. And honestly, I was too terrified to ask. The weeks that followed were agonizing. I gave him the space he asked for, but it felt unbearable. Each day without him in the house was like living with a gaping hole inside of me, a void filled with guilt and regret. I threw myself into work, tried spending time with friends, anything to keep my mind off the constant pain, but none of it worked. My thoughts always drifted back to him, what he was doing, where he was, whether he was thinking about me, about us. I replayed that night at the pre-party over and over again in my mind, wishing I could go back, undo the stupid kiss that had destroyed everything. A month passed, and finally, I received a message from him. It was simple, just a text. "Let's meet up." My heart sank as I read it. I knew that this was it. Either we were going to work things out, or he was going to tell me it was over. I tried to push the thoughts away, but by the time we met at the cafe, my nerves were shot. We sat across from each other in the same place we had been before. The air between us felt thick, weighed down by all the unspoken tension. He looked exhausted, more worn down than the last time I had seen him, if that was even possible. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, like he was forcing the words out. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his eyes fixed on the table, avoiding mine. "About everything, about us." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I was too scared to speak, terrified that anything I said might push him further away. "I'm not going to lie," he continued. "What you did hurt, and I don't know if I can fully trust you again." Those words landed like a physical blow. I had been holding out hope for something, anything to suggest we could fix things. But hearing him say that he didn't know if he could trust me, it felt like the end. But then he added, "I've also been thinking about everything we've been through, all the good times, all the hard times, and I don't want to just throw that away." For the first time, a tiny flicker of hope sparked inside me. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. "I need time," he said, finally looking me in the eye. "I'm not saying we're back to normal, because we're not. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if we can rebuild this." Relief flooded over me, but it was tempered by anxiety. This wasn't a clean slate, not a definitive yes that everything would be okay, but it was something, a chance. And I knew I had to hold on to that. "I know I messed up," I said, my voice shaky with emotion. "I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry." I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. He didn't respond for a long while, just stared into his coffee again. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost tired. I'm going to stay with Steve for a while longer, he said. I'm not ready to come home yet. I need more time. But we'll keep talking, okay? I nodded, doing my best to mask my disappointment. I wanted him to come home, wanted everything to go back to how it was before. But I knew that wasn't going to happen overnight. Over the next few weeks, we stayed in touch. We texted, called each other, even met up a few more times. Each time, it felt like we were making progress, but it was slow, agonizingly slow. He was still distant, still guarded, and I couldn't blame him for that. He had every right to protect himself after what I had done. All I could do was hold on to the hope that, little by little, we could find our way back to each other. I had broken something between us, and I knew deep down it wasn't something that could be fixed with just a few apologies. A couple of months after our second meeting at the cafe, he came over to pick up some clothes. After packing his bag, we sat in the living room together. The air was thick with tension, and neither of us really knew how to break the silence. We were just sitting there, awkward and uncertain, until finally he spoke. I miss this, he said, his voice soft, almost fragile. I miss being here. I miss us. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I had to blink them back before they could fall. I miss you too, I replied, my voice shaky. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at me. His eyes filled with doubt, but also something else, maybe hope. I want to try, he said cautiously. I'm not sure if I can get past what happened, but I want to try for us. It wasn't the grand reconciliation I had secretly hoped for, but in that moment, it was more than I had dared to expect. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, but the hope was enough for me. He even asked me out on a date for the same week, suggesting we meet at a restaurant. I was excited, hopeful even, as I walked through the door of the restaurant, until I saw him. My husband. He was passionately kissing another woman. My world collapsed in that instant. The shock and betrayal hit me so hard that I couldn't stop the tears. Without thinking, I turned and ran out of the restaurant. When I got to my car, my phone buzzed. A message from my husband. Feels good, doesn't it? Was that what he was trying to do? Had he set this whole thing up just to get revenge for a stupid kiss? I couldn't believe what was happening. In the end, I realized something heartbreaking. Trust, once broken, doesn't just come back. The moment I broke his trust, everything started spiraling downhill. It didn't matter how much he loved me. Love alone wasn't enough if the trust between us was shattered. Update. Hey, everyone. I didn't expect to be writing an update, but a lot has happened since my last post. So here we are. Things between my husband and me have become even more complicated. After he moved out, we spent a few weeks apart. At first, it felt like maybe we could figure things out. There were moments of calm, but it wasn't smooth sailing. We met up for coffee a few times to try to work out a divorce agreement without lawyers, thinking it would be cheaper and easier that way. Yet, even during these meetings, there was always this weight in the air, this unspoken tension. Every conversation, every argument seemed to circle back to that kiss. Even if we didn't directly mention it, it was always there, hanging over us like a dark cloud. My mother-in-law suggested couples counseling, not because we wanted to get back together, but so we could break up without leaving things unresolved. It sounded reasonable, so we went. I thought maybe it would help us work through the hurt and move on. We tackled all the heavy stuff. Communication, trust, everything. We even decided to give it another shot, trying to rebuild while still going to therapy. But no matter how many sessions we had, I could tell something was missing. My husband said he forgave me, but I don't think he ever really did. He tried, but he just couldn't get past what had happened. And slowly, he started pulling away again, coming home late from work, spending more time with his friends and less with me. Whenever I asked him about it, he'd brush me off, saying he was just busy or tired. But I knew something was wrong. One night, I found out why. I wasn't looking to snoop. I didn't mean to. His phone was on the kitchen counter. and a message popped up from someone named Carol. At first, I didn't think much of it. He works with a lot of people, including women, and I've met a few of his female co-workers before. But something about that message caught my attention. It wasn't obvious, but it felt too casual, too familiar. I didn't say anything that night, but I started paying attention. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more messages from Carol. They weren't just about work either. They were texting late into the night, long after the workday was over. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that it was nothing, but deep down, I knew something was off. One night, after he fell asleep, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed his phone and read through the messages. It wasn't good. They weren't explicit, but they were definitely too close, too flirtatious for comfort. It was the kind of intimacy that didn't belong in a marriage. My heart sank. Everything we had worked so hard to rebuild felt like it was crumbling all over again. The next morning, I confronted him. I'll never forget the look on his face when I asked him about Carol, shock, then denial. He swore she was just a friend from work, that there was nothing going on. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. We argued for hours. He kept telling me I was being paranoid because of what had happened with Ron. But I wasn't imagining things, and I wasn't going to let him gaslight me into thinking I was. Eventually, he admitted it. He said nothing physical had happened, but they had been talking a lot. He told me he didn't mean for it to turn into anything, but he was lonely. He felt disconnected from me after everything that happened with Ron. He said he had fun with her and was tired of trying to fix things with me. I was devastated. After everything we had been through, he had done this. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I had no right to be angry, considering what I had done, but I couldn't help but feel betrayed. We decided to separate again, and this time, it feels final. We haven't filed for divorce yet, but it's where we're headed. I don't know if we'll ever get back together, and honestly, I don't know if I even want to. The trust between us is completely shattered, and I don't know if it can ever be rebuilt. I've learned a lot through all of this. I've realized that we both made mistakes, and while I regret what happened with Ron, I also know my husband's actions were his own choice. We both played a part in the breakdown of our marriage, but that doesn't make it any less painful. As for Ron, I haven't spoken to him since everything blew up with my husband. I realized that Ron wasn't really a part of my life. He was just a symptom of the larger problems in my marriage, not the cause. And I'm okay with that. I don't need more drama in my life. So that's where things stand. My husband and I are separated, and we're figuring out what comes next. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm taking it one day at a time. Thanks to everyone who offered advice and support. It's been a rough journey, but I'm getting through it slowly but surely.